Ladies and gentlemen, crazy news coming out of Arizona. The world is shocked. Not entirely sure why. Abortion is murder. Duh. Next question. We're going to answer that. Stick around to the end of the video. All right. So here's the big deal. Arizona is like a 50-50 state. It's a pretty balanced paradigm, right? And so now we've got a Supreme Court rolling back to the draconian standards of life begins at conception.
1860s. Yeah.
Right? Not even that. Just like, hey, we don't say where life begins at the federal level.
Right.
Well, okay,
exactly.
to be clear, what they're doing is they're banning abortions for almost all instances. The only exception that they're making is
at the
for
state level,
the threat of the at the state level.
The state's
banning
Supreme
abortions.
Court.
The only exception is in the case where the mother's life is in danger. So
Right.
no exceptions for incest, no exceptions for rape, and a 2 to 5 year prison sentence for anyone that performs the abortion. Interesting. The one that performs it. And I don't know if there's anything that
Correct.
I didn't read
Harsh.
If someone
anything that
killed a
said
baby,
for-
I would put them in. It would put them
No,
in
I'm
jail.
saying like for the mother. I don't know if there's anything that they're thinking about doing, because I know that was a big thing politically. Like,
Yeah.
they're going to send mothers to, prison.
Harsh.
I think it's just
Harsh but fair. Anyway, so we digress. So what is this causing problems for in the Christian community? Yeah, so listen, we're not here to talk about Biden or Trump from a political standpoint. I'm not going to tell you to vote for. We'll leave that to you. Anyway, here's what is interesting, is that a lot of people have been frustrated. There's been a lot of, within conservative circles and Christian circles, a lot of this debate about like, well, Trump is not going to, he's not going to support a federal ban on abortion. Oh no, what do we do? Is he the chosen one? Is he not the chosen one?
Is he still?
I don't.
Is he
Right? Is he still the chosen one? Like,
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy this sin, not join them!
you are the chosen one. Anyway, my point is here's the thing. Here's the thing, folks. This is not that complicated, okay? The reason it seems complicated, from my view, is because people want to think about our country as one country, which it is, but we are still the United States of America. And so for those of you who didn't pay attention in high school, we have this notion in our country of like strong federal government and like strong state government. All right. And that's
in competition.
Right. In competition. And why does this exist? Because, hey, guess what? People in different parts of our huge country. And listen, folks, for those of you who haven't been watching the show long enough, I live in Germany. All right. This whole continent is about the size of our country. And if you like, the difference between people here is so drastic that they're their own very independent cultures here. And nobody thinks twice about thinking that people in Italy don't think the same way as people in Germany. In fact, it's a caricature. It's so dynamic, right? But for some reason, when we talk about America, people think that we're all the same, and we're not. So our founders knew this, right? Because even at the time of with our original 13 colonies and all of this, we were very, very different in terms of our core values, our biblical beliefs and whatnot. And our founders tried to distill all this into like what are the things that we all hold in common? And that was our Bill of Rights. Okay. And it was based in a Judeo-Christian
and
belief
even
system.
then, though, originally before incorporation, the Bill of Rights only constrained the federal government. It wasn't,
which is my point.
Until after,
My point was that the federal government used to have this. We have this idea that the federal government exists to promote and protect those things that we mutually agree and hold in common. So yeah, I guess this is where the discussion comes in. Is how do you guys feel about this? Where are you thinking at
the
with
Bill of
this?
Rights, we hold these truths to be self-evident: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And obviously, there's a lot more in there. But for me, I land on, okay, so the federal government has done good and necessary things like the abolition of slavery, right?
Yeah.
So this is super relevant because that was
I
right.
didn't know we were going to debate slavery.
Well, we're not debating slavery.
Wearing my
Here's
abortion
point.
pants.
Literally, my point is that no one is debating
We're not
the
debating
federal
anything.
government banning slavery when it did. And so the fact that we are debating the federal government's role in this and other things versus a state's government, perspective, I don't know. I just think for me that's relevant because I personally think abortion is semi-equivalent to slavery, right? Like there are moral realities that are very similar. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stand on a soapbox on the corner of the street and like
but it's a great moral evil that you feel an impulse to
correct, which is why I think it's
from your
imperative that we engage, right? Like I see so many Christians, you know, friends of mine, individuals, where they have no problem getting on the side of like, yeah, slavery was bad, but like the abortion thing is more of like, what do we do? What do we say? Where can we talk about it? Where can we not talk about it? I'm afraid to even say something. So like, I just think engaging on this topic is imperative because there's a responsibility around civic duty that we're going to get to because you can't just put your head in the sand. Like that is not okay. And why is that not okay? Well, we're going to get to it.
Can I tell you what I think like the moral quandary is that like genuine pro-life Christians from a political standpoint are struggling with? Because I mean, I had to think through it myself, right? Because for our whole lives until Roe v. Wade was overturned, we really didn't actually have to think about the practicalities of what banning abortion would look like because we could. We were, you know, we could kind of incrementally try to put some regulations and the Supreme Court would strike them down. And it was just like this little side game. But now the moral quandary is this, right? And we have a couple of elections under our belt since then to show that. It's that there's a big chunk of people who are probably largely in alignment with Christians on a lot of things. And they are not willing to give up their perceived safety net, get out of responsibility free card of abortion. And so Christians are looking at this and saying, well, hey, am I supposed to lose elections on principle, right? And say, no, I will be full bore pro-life. I won't vote for anybody at any level who isn't supporting a ban. Or do I say, well, you know, if I can't win an election at all, if I support pro-life, do I try to win the election that I can win and say, okay, we're not going to enact these things? I think that's the genuine struggle, you know, that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know for me personally, like and this is definitely a hot topic to say, but like I have no problem being a single issue voter. And I know how much people hate that term, but like for me personally around the issue of abortion, like that does dramatically 90% of my vote, you know, I start there a lot of times. Now I think well and wisely, so it's not like all that I'm thinking about, but you know, the realities of the implications of what Donald Trump did do with his election to the Supreme Court, and therefore now the world that we live in federally because of those decisions, like that, you know, like no one thought that was ever going to be a reality, yet look at the world that we live in. No one ever thought Roe v. Wade would ever be overturned, and look what happened. So there are implications that are a lot longer than people are thinking about when it comes to their decisions about engaging with their civic duties.
Yeah, this is, if I can jump in here, this is something that, like, again, you know, I'm not going to get into, you know, specific candidates or whatnot, but the idea of understanding how our government works and why we need to be engaged at certain levels and what hills we can die on and what ones we shouldn't, and especially with which flavor of candidate, it's really important. So like, let's take, you know, the presidential election. You know, one of the things the president has the power to do is appoint and nominate Supreme Court justices, right? So when we look at the last election, that was a big factor. It wasn't really about it was a single issue thing for a lot of us because we understood that like the next president was going to appoint at least one, maybe two Supreme Court justices. So in that way, while it related to maybe there was one single issue that might be served as a litmus test, it highlighted a bigger issue that you need to understand how the government works, because it's going to have moral and ethical implications on how you live out your faith and your calling in life.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here. What I want people to understand is that while I believe that it was the intent of the founders, while I believe that it is consistent with the Bill of Rights, and while I believe that it would be the greatest good that we should see abortion banned at the federal level, our country has effectively, you know, divorced itself from the it's the cut flower. We talk about the cut flower syndrome. Like if the roots are the Judeo-Christian moral foundation, we have divorced ourselves from that. And so now we're left with the stem, which is the Bill of Rights, right? It grew up out of the roots, but we can't say it connects to it anymore. So we have to go with that, right? We've divorced ourselves from that. So then what's the next best thing? What I want to encourage people to think about is this, that if the best we can hope for is if it looks like the ability to impact a federal ban is something that's not going to happen, then what's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing is to ensure that we have the ability to influence our government morally and ethically at the next lowest level, which is the state.
Yep.
And so if we have the ability to do that, then we're able to effectively live a moral and ethical life in our own states and show ourselves and create our states as an example and kind of let the fruit bear it out,
Can I
Going back to the the severed flower aspect of it is, we've kind of divorced ourselves from as a nation from Judeo-Christian values as a foundation. There also is a movement that is going on in the more of the Jordan Peterson sphere to acknowledge that the family unit is the foundation of a society. It provides emotional support. It provides cultural pass down, social stability to any kind of society. And so even though those things are just those are results of a good Judeo-Christian ethic,
Correct.
People are recognizing that, right? And so I think that there's been a very good education on that and recognizing that the stronger the family is, the lower the crime is. The stronger the family is, the better the society is. There's definitely more virtues that are looked at to be as important. Now, so if we do that and say, all right, let's go from that standpoint, where I think that more people are at least value life, even if in an unborn child, than don't at their core, if they're really pressed to it. There is now an option in the United States to say, well, some states are going to be more strict than others, and then it gives people the freedom to kind of move out of a state that's more strict or move into a state that's more strict. And that's why at the local level, it's important to vote and try to, you can be the city on the hill, like you were saying, Josh, before we started recording. You can be the city on a hill in your own state.
Yeah, and this is real quick because I know Tim wants to go, but I just want to point this out because we've said it in previous episodes, and I just want to hit this thread. This is the direction we're moving. I want to encourage people. Listen to me. Our world, we are living the byproduct of rampant postmodern individualism, and the pendulum is in full swing in the other direction. Society is beginning to understand and recognize the value of why we operate on shared beliefs. And when you realize that you can't just live as an individual and survive, you start looking around for people who really believe what you believe. And so you can say you support these things and we give lip service to all this, but what's really coming down to is like people are voting with their feet and they're voting with their, where they live and what they do. It's become more and more evident, especially since COVID. Tim, go.
Yeah, I just have completely different moral calculus than I think all of you on this, right? Because I think that the notion that, it's not popular or viable to do it in federal level, so we'll just go to the state level. I think that's a little bit of a cope, right, from the pro-lifers, right? Because I think the actual difficulty is that this Arizona thing is causing blowback on conservatives in Arizona, right? They're wondering, hold on, are we now going to lose the Republican control or conservative control or whatever in our own state because we basically had a court decide this and now we're going to take an electoral bath. And now, even though we might have for a time being this court ruling that says, abortion can't happen in Arizona, at the same time, we're going to lose all of these other things. And let me give you sort of an example of how I game that out in my own mind. And I am obviously aggressively pro-life. It's murder, and I support the jailing of anybody who participates in that. The ability of other people to kill their children is not my top priority. So if, for example, shout out BCM, I'm pretty pro-gun over here, my ability to defend my right to legally and lawfully defend my family is higher up on my political priority list than preventing other people from killing their children. This is a national moral stain, but from a practical standpoint of my responsibilities, this is higher, right? So if I'm choosing a political agenda that says, all right, if I can get someone who's pro this, the things that are more important to me, but I haven't yet convinced them to be on my side here, that's what I'm going to pick. And that's, I think, the trade-offs that we're having to make in the post-Roe era, because this is not your mother's pro-life movement anymore. The stakes and negotiations are different.
The possibilities
Tim,
are there.
I agree with you, Tim. Like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not even saying that we give up or advocate that ground. I'm simply saying that the game's not over. Like, don't think that you, like, because my point is, if anything, it helps. What I'm suggesting helps your argument, because what I'm saying is that there are things that at the federal level we have a lot more ground. Like, it's a more we're being pragmatic here. Like, if you simply said, like, I want someone who believes 100% in line with my, Christian or my moral views and my priorities, or I'm not going to vote for them, like, you're not going to get that. So the question is,
and you're going to lose everything,
and you're going to lose everything.
For
exactly.
Trying. Yeah.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is, for the person who's sitting here saying, like, hey, one candidate or the other candidate is on point, but, like, you think, like, I don't want people to have moral injury, is really kind of what I'm getting at. Is that, like, I want you to think about the fact that, like, just because a candidate does not support, or maybe doesn't support, or think it's tenable to push for a federal ban on abortion, does not mean that you are effectively culpable for that, is what I'm getting at. Like, there's a middle ground, because you are only accountable for what you are able to influence, if that makes any sense.
Well, to that, you're only accountable for that which you're able to influence, which I think is a pertinent part of this conversation, and we're not going to be able to get away from this. Like, if you're listening to this, you need to do a self-check. Like, how engaged are you in the current events, the civic responsibilities, and ways that you can engage? And I'll just give a really great example. In my state, so in Virginia, the governor flipped not long ago, right? And so, like, that was a big deal. And so what happened was Glenn Youngkin, that we had a Republican governor happen, and there was all this talk of, like, this has never happened. Oh my gosh, the state of Virginia has always been so blue. But then what recently happened in end of last year was not enough individuals voted, and so the House flipped. So the Democrats won control of the Virginia House and Senate. And again, this is not taking a side on Democrats versus Republicans. What I am pointing out is, we can get people to show up to a national election, but, like, it is arguably now more important for individuals to be paying attention to local elections on this topic,
school boards.
And school boards. And
school boards are relevant. We're homeschooling. We talked about this.
I know, right? You can watch the last episode.
No, I'm playing by their rules. I want to educate other people's children according to my values.
Proactive. Let's go. That's what I'm talking about. Seed the hype.
So, like,
That's so funny.
As an employer, one of my favorite things to do is, whenever there's a local election, and definitely a federal election, but I'm like, I will pay you to not be here. Go exercise your civic responsibility. And Hughes, I would love to tee it over to you, because I think you really hit home with this one. Like, as an individual, like, I have had a lot of my friends, if some of you are listening right now, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to call you out, but it comes time for a vote or an election, whether it has to do with gun rights, whether it has to do with religious freedom, whether it has to do with abortion, and they're like, oh yeah, I didn't vote, oh I don't vote, or I forgot. Like, I just want to anyway. Hughes, you're up.
All right,
Who is that by name exactly that you're talking about, Nick? So they know.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Sure, yeah, just find your
naughty
name
list.
below.
We will be contacting you for a
we wanna
subscription.
see-
Otherwise,
that's
we will
right.
dox you.
Go ahead and post your I voted sticker in the comments. So yeah, let's talk about that. So we've talked about this in other episodes. What we have as American citizens is it's really important. God expects a return on investment, effectively, right? Like, what he gives us, he expects us to use for his glory, to advance the kingdom, right?
Because of the parable of the talents and
That's
other
right.
things in
And
Scripture
if we look at the parable of the talents, right? That's, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, basically you've got a master who gives out some gold to each of his servants, to a couple of his servants. And, one of them goes off and he invests it. And one of them goes off and he invests it, but he loses, his money. The first guy, he makes a big investment. Maybe he gets a good return.
So the 10, he gave one 10 and he made another 10. He gave one 5 and he made another 5. And then he gave one 2. And the guy he gave 2 to went and buried it in the ground.
Buried it.
Right. He just buried it because he had so little. He was worried, oh man, well, like if I lose it, I won't have anything. Right. And so, when it comes back, the guy who buried it, he kind of gets called out and said, hey, why didn't you do anything with this, right? And so, often I've looked at that, and I've made this point before that, as American citizens, if we think that we won't stand before God one day and give an account for what we did with our citizenship, what is afforded to us, we're wrong. And so, like, think about that, like what we have, what we're able to do. Look at what Paul did with his Roman citizenship, compared to the other apostles, right? Like, this is why we can point to this and say that this is very clearly, it was wielded by Paul for the advance of the kingdom. He used it frequently.
Amen.
And we have to do that.
Lawful to kill a Roman
exactly.
citizen?
And this
Without
is
a
why, but you can't do that if you don't even know. And listen, again, go watch our education episode last. Like, you might have been a victim. All right. You might be a victim here. I'm not faulting anybody. Okay. But a lot of people don't, we were really good as human beings of compartmentalizing our lives. And if there's one thing that I want us to take, especially in this podcast in general, is that, like, Christianity is fundamentally how we understand the world to work, which means it touches everything. Everything. You can't just put it in a box that you go to and open up on Sunday. That's good for keeping your kids out of trouble and good for winning arguments with your spouse. Like, that's not going to be...
And it's not good enough to be a single issue voter to make yourself feel moral.
Facts.
With how you use your responsibility. You actually have to use it wisely.
So then what's so that you have a moral responsibility as a Christian, right? We obviously want to make the impact on our country, maybe starting at the local level while also trying to maintain the federal level. And there's been talks about a federal ban. Here's the question that I have about a federal ban of abortion or just legislating morality in general. Oftentimes, I think the Greeks believed that right thinking produced right doing, and the Romans thought that right doing produced right thinking. And so you could make that argument in a couple of different ways with, say, the abolition of slavery. You had the right doing produce the right thinking after a time period of putting things into place. You might make the same argument that says when we do a national ban of abortion, it might produce right thinking. At the same time, that we've had Roe v. Wade, and then we've had the abolishment of Roe v. Wade. We might have a ban of abortion, and then we might have the abolishment of the ban of abortion, and it can go back and forth. And so, my thought is, where is the effectiveness? What is the strategy here? And at the same time, like, being compassionate towards people that are not there, people that are not Christians in this country, that are living off the benefits of a Judeo-Christian ethic. There is definitely, that movement that is a non-Christian aspect that says, family is valuable, that they not be religious, but they identify that as being valuable. The place where I think that it gets dangerous is when you have something like what I see as the Christian nationalism movement that essentially is completely snubbing, anybody that doesn't agree with not only what they want to do, but also with their theology. Which there's such a variety. Dude,
that's a whole other episode.
That's a whole other episode.
Josh,
what I'm saying is, though,
Josh,
is mandating morality and legislating morality becomes a slippery slope.
When
we take action.
Hold on.
No, Josh, let me jump in here.
Come at me, bro.
Let me jump in here real quick. So here's what I would say to that. Okay, here's what I would say to that. We're talking about two different things. Well, we're talking about two things. One is like how we have private votes for a reason, right? Like I'm not suggesting that you should hide what you vote, but what I'm getting at is that like you vote how you vote. The point is this: if enough people in this country believe that abortion is murder and vote accordingly and abortion becomes illegal, I didn't legislate. I'm not like, if you,
I agree
you get
with
to
that.
choose, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you might find yourself in a country that disagrees with you. Like if I go to a Muslim country where they don't permit, like Saudi Arabia, where, you know, they don't permit the drinking of alcohol or anything like that, like you're not going to be upset about not being able to get a beer. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
you're in a foreign, you're a stranger in a strange land. Like, hey,
Right.
guess what? You might have been born here, but you might find yourself a stranger in a strange land.
Well-
and guess what? I'm saying that as a person who finds themselves as a stranger in a strange land.
Right.
Like I've
Well,
spent
see, and
my
this-
entire life being a stranger in a strange freaking land. So guess what?
Yeah.
If the tide turns, as it's known to do, well then guess what? It's your turn. Like it's your turn, nerd. Either stick around or leave.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Stick
done.
around.
That's-
and
sorry, I wanted to
engage.
leave that- I wanted to
Stick
leave that
around
pause.
And engage or leave.
I'm gonna leave that pause for the clip that I'm about to make out of that.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
like, but you said that legislating morality was a slippery slope, and I don't. Can you
think
justify
so.
that? Because I think that's just
Because the moment that you go
Lunacy.
and you legislate morality, is you're just waiting for the next person
what
to get
do you
elected to
think we
overturn that.
legislate?
I think no.
Promote good,
Okay.
punish evil.
Yeah. No. To the extent of what we're talking about here, we're talking about abortion specifically. So I'm talking about abortion. Basically, you legislate a ban on abortion. There's two approaches, right? Either we legislate it, and that's what I was thinking. You produce right thinking will produce right doing, right? Or right doing will produce right thinking. Here is the
Both.
dilemma. If we were to do, I agree, both. But here's the thing. If we do a national abortion ban, which I'm not against, I would be for this. And so maybe that's playing my hand here. At the same time, though, I understand that it's just an election away to be overturned. Now,
Sure,
it might take
and if
some
it
time,
does,
but exactly. But that's
then-
what I'm
then you're
saying.
right
Is
back
you
where I
have to
said.
do exactly. But you have to win the hearts and the minds of the people to say, no, this is valuable, so that when you get a collective, what you were saying, Josh, where everybody agrees, essentially, or at least a majority of people agree, and you pass legislation, there may be things that are put in place that make it have the most longevity as possible. That's
Josh,
the point that I have. So
I
if
agree
you
with
still
you.
agree with
disciple
me, let me
people,
know, but-
folks. Listen, what Josh is saying
Yeah.
is this: go to church, learn to disciple, be about the kingdom's business. That's what Josh is saying. Am I wrong?
Okay, but let me
Right.
let me use the slavery analogy that you made, because historically it's actually really a sharp way. The reason we had slavery at the inception of this country in the first place was because there was a lot of moral points that all of the original states agreed on at that time, and there was one big one that they didn't. Okay, so they said, you know what, I'm not gonna, because if you were going to be a hardcore abolitionist at the founding of the nation, you would have had to say, and this is kind of what I see the mistake of the hardcore single issue pro-lifers doing, is say, well, if you guys can't give in on the issue of slavery, then we're just not going to have a country at all, and none of this other
Right.
good stuff is ever
They
going
did
to
make-
happen.
Right.
And that's
concessions to that.
that's the strategic part of it, and you have to recognize that, you know, you and God doesn't do this with us, right? You are accountable for the light that is in you. He has not throughout history held all of us accountable for the full moral intelligence that we ultimately have evolved into over time. I mean, you look at the things that even went on in ancient Israel. I mean, they were a direct theocracy, but God knew that from a societal, cultural standpoint, it makes more sense to have an evolutionary approach to elevating the morality of your culture than it does just come in and say, hey, everything's going to be done God's way today, because
Right.
he is guiding us. And so I think it's instructive to recognize that, you know, it's not always wise to go for, and sometimes you do have to recognize these people are sinners and they're wrong, and we need to
Yeah.
take the opportunities that we actually have and recognize when certain opportunities are not ones we have yet, while you lay the groundwork for those opportunities in the future.
We're raising
that-
children.
Amen.
That's
And
all we're
that-
doing.
Back to the raising children. Go watch our last episode. But I think the time aspect is super important, and it is very relevant to discuss abolition. And Tim, your point was very valid, because like if you haven't read the book Amazing Grace by Eric Metaxas, it tells the story of William Wilberforce. It's literally top 10 books I've ever read. I can't recommend it more highly. But back to the time component, right? Like, okay, think about abolition. It was a cultural norm, and there were individuals making moves through generations before we started to see a shift that took place. Think about something like cigarettes. Think about, and so like back to the legislation of morality and the fact that we can't put our heads in the sand, we have to have a long-term thinking mentality, is that, you know, there are certain states, like in my work right now, I would love to see a federal, not ban, a federal gate on the access to pornography, where if you're a minor, you can't go to pornography websites. Here's what's currently happening. My job began as an executive director of a purity ministry 8 years ago. 8 years ago, there was no state, I think maybe Utah, there was one state that was playing around with this. I think there's like 11 states now that are gating.
I think isn't Virginia one of them?
Virginia just did it in the last like 8 months. And so like, if I try and go to the most famous porn website, there's a disclaimer that shows up that basically says you can't access this in this state. And so I do think the relevance of the legislation of morality is really good, because I think we can all agree that, you know, minors shouldn't be smoking cigarettes. And there was a time in our culture where doctors were recommending them. And so like abolition, right? Like there were individuals making moves that took time. So like with this issue, I actually think it's cool and helpful that we get to say to our children, we lived through the world where Roe v. Wade was overturned, and 50 years of work prior to get us to this point. And there is a reality where 50 years from now, back to the fact of we should all be raising our children well in holistic homes and outbreeding the crazies.
Teaching other people's children via your local public schools.
Let's go.
Outbreeding the crazies. That in 50 years from now,
weaponize your public schools.
We could see a federal ban on abortion.
We totally could.
That would be.
And
Let me finish.
Listen.
Let me finish. That would be universally recognized by the culture. But like we can't give up the ground right now. That's all.
For sure. Listen, I agree. That's so good, Nick. And this is why it's important to think. There's a reason Juneteenth is a holiday. It's because it took time. It took time from.
No, BS. That was just randomly put down. Racial virtue signaling out of. Nobody heard of Juneteenth.
Hey, it doesn't matter if I knew that it was real or not. It doesn't matter if I knew that it was a real thing or not until a couple years ago.
He's using it as an example, Tim. Let him
Every time you say Juneteenth, you get dumber.
No, stop.
Stop.
Pivot away.
Listen.
Right,
what I'm saying is,
Hold on, make your point.
What I'm saying is, it takes time. All right. And this is what is important. And this is why we're doing this podcast. This is why speaking out matters. Because like we've said before, the pendulum is swinging. Yeah. And here's what happens. People start to talk more. There's a reason I'm doing this podcast and we're all doing this podcast now. We weren't doing it last year. Okay. There's no new changes. Still got the technology, had the money to do it. Could have done it last year. Didn't. Why am I doing it this year? Because it became apparent to me that it was necessary, because it became apparent to us that it was necessary.
Yeah, the question's just like that. Am I a bad person if I vote for a candidate who makes a strategic choice
about... When a law changes, yes, Nick. Yeah. When a law changes and other people realize, I mean, I'm not upset about that law.
Right.
Like, so that tells you that you're not alone. That tells you that not just that you weren't alone, but that enough of you felt a certain way that you were able to make a change. Folks, that's what we got to do. That's what we have to be about. Don't preserve the relationship, folks. Listen to me. Do the right thing. Do the right thing.
Well, that's so simple. You just do the right thing well. Right?
We need to be, like, as Christians, we're called to bring about this already but not yet kingdom that is here, right? We're supposed to be bringing and ushering in the kingdom of God into the world. And from that, you'll have spiritual blessings. You'll have physical blessings. You'll see amazing things happen when you're faithful to God, just because the way that the lifestyle is, it just tends to produce a better society. So what can we do right now that we have a overturning of Roe v. Wade, and now it's going and being decided by the states. What can we do as Christians now, from the extent of, do we pick it outside of abortion clinics? Do we start creating programs supporting our local programs? Do we have conversations with, do we have mothers groups? In fact, one of the things that in the church that I go to has in our vision plan is having a mother's medical facility on campus for mothers that are considering abortion, having a place where we can do ultrasounds, where they can hear the baby's heartbeat, something that they can receive care, receive Christian counseling, and receive support. A lot of people that are not Christians have often made a very valid point to say, well, look, I get that you don't like abortion. You don't like abortion in mothers, and let's throw aside the less than 1% or the very small percentage of incest, rape, and the danger of the mother's life. Let's talk about when we are forcing or mandating that single mothers essentially have kids with no family support, no nothing. Are Christians going to step in? Are we going to be putting towards the effort to help those mothers, help the widows and the orphans, really, like in some sense? Does that qualify? Because we're willing to pass the laws to say you can't have an abortion, but there's not a whole lot that is put forward to say we're going to make sure that you're taken care of.
Allowing you to kill your children doesn't make me responsible for your children.
You're missing the point, Tim. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's one or the other. I'm saying, are we also in saying we want to abolish abortion, but we're willing to sacrifice certain aspects of our comfort to build a better society, to take care of the family, to create women's homes, things like that.
We're not.
No. I agree, Josh. Hold on. I agree with Josh. I think the point. But what I'm saying is like, this always happens. We do this to each other all the time, not just us in this podcast, but I mean Christians. Yeah. Right.
Oh.
Yeah. Like, can we talk about the thing we're talking about? Like, I don't think it's wrong. I think like I'm not saying this because you're right. The thing is we always feel the need to caveat this. Of course, you're supposed to take care of widows and orphans. Of course, you're supposed to be making disciples. The fact that I even have to say that is so frustrating to me. Like, it's so frustrating that I have to explain to people that they need to disciple their own freaking children. Like, what? Yeah. I don't. I'm here. I'm trying to give you steak, folks. If you want oatmeal, go somewhere else.
It happens because people are moral balancing. They're moral balancing, and it makes them uncomfortable to take something away from someone rhetorically. Say, oh, you can't have abortions. Oh, but we're going to offer you all this support and all this stuff. It is.
I know that's not what he's saying.
He's not saying that. If we're talking
that.
About Christians, I am 100% on board. Stop drinking milk, folks. Eat some meat. Okay, maturity in Christ. If you've been a Christian all of your life, you should be reading and studying the Bible for yourself. You should be allowing God to affect your life and make your decisions for you. Now,
anyway,
what I'm saying is, let me say, for those in our society that are non-Christians that are saying, look, if we get rid of abortions, what about children are going to be in families that don't have dads, that don't have all these things. That's not a caveat to say, well, we shouldn't do it. That's to say, we shouldn't just let that fall off the cliff as Christians. This is our society, right?
Agreed.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, was it in this podcast where we talked about, I can't remember, where there was a state in Africa where the church was like, we will now take care of all the orphans, and there were no more orphans. Yeah. So again, there's no obligation here. We're not having a conversation about obligation. We're having a conversation about Christian charity. And so like my wife and I have made the decision that we're going to be giving to Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center, which is a local nonprofit that literally does that.
They do great work.
Because for us, it was important to equally serve those mothers in that space. And
by the way, shout out on that. They post regular lists of specific merchandise they need via Amazon that you can have shipped to them. So if you do want to do something on that score,
we'll tag them below.
Yeah. Which, and again, that's my point where it's like, I think part of, and shout out to Keller Hopkins, because I told him, I keep telling him I'm going to do this and I haven't yet, is that he was saying he's loving this conversation because we're having the long form chats that no one is having, but everyone is thinking about. And it's like, this point is simple. You need to engage civically with the responsibility you bear as an American citizen. And equally, there's a reality around your kingdom investment and Christian charity that's like, my wife and I are getting on both. Like, we vote at every election, no matter the level. Oh, and by the way, we're also simultaneously investing in this specific problem. So it's like, what else can we do? And as a listener, you should be thinking, like, putting those filters on, like, where are you at on this spectrum?
So, but like one thing you said, like we're having the conversations that people are thinking, but they're not saying. So there's people who think things and then don't say them. Is that?
They think
yeah,
them.
I know. I know it's a strange concept for you, Tim.
It's not politically correct to bring up this conversation. I mean, like, guys, the amount that we debated, should 4 dudes be talking about abortion, right?
Yeah.
Like, even that alone was like, okay, what's going to happen? And it's like, I think doing it well and with wisdom and with nuance is the point of what we're doing.
Nick,
I think it's okay to yell about it occasionally.
Yeah, listen.
Don't yell at the listeners.
Hey, listen, folks. And this is the thing. We're all broken, fallen people here. Okay,
Yes.
Nobody here is perfect. All right, but here's the point. I think as Christians, this is one of the things that we struggle with. We know that we are sinners, that we are in need of a tremendous amount of grace, and people who are sincere about their faith struggle with this. Because the Bible tells us, like, hey, look, don't worry about the speck in the other person's eye when you got a telephone pole sticking out of your own. Like, that's a healthy thing to fear, right? But discipleship, the business of the church is to equip the saints for the work of the kingdom, folks. You got to get better. You got to open yourself up to let somebody speak truth into your life. You got to be willing to speak truth into someone's life. Like, that's what it means to disciple someone. When I disciple someone, you got to have hard conversations. You got to sit down with somebody and say, listen, I'm seeing a lack of congruence between what you're doing and what I believe you to be seeking. And you have come to me and asked me to walk, alongside you and to disciple you. And so what I'm telling you is, if you want to make that better, this is what you need to do. Right. And I'm not doing that. That's not, in that hypothetical situation, that's not my opinion. That's coming from a place of biblical authority. That's anchored in the Word of God. And that's what we're trying to say here, folks, is that we need to stop being so worried about saying something that's going to offend somebody. If you're speaking from what the Bible says, if you are proclaiming the Word of God, you don't need to caveat, because it's not your idea.
Truth is still the truth, even if you don't look at it, right?
That's right.
Even if you're shielding your eyes from it, truth is still truth. Truth has the power to silence opposition. So when you have one of the things that you see, all of these viral videos that happen online of Ben Shapiro owning this liberal, or Jon Stewart owning this conservative, and oftentimes it has to do with truth, right? Now, sometimes it's a bloviation and it's totally for show, but when somebody is confronted with the truth that is a critic, it shuts them up. You can't deny it. It's the emperor has no clothes. Everybody wants to be a wise person. Everybody wants to be seen and have vanity, but sometimes we go along as in our society thinking, well, let's just go along with it. I don't want to be looked at differently. I don't want somebody to look down at me. I don't want somebody to think that I'm stupid. And sometimes it takes the honesty of a child to say,
somebody
the emperor has
going to
no
look
clothes.
down on you.
Yeah, somebody is.
Right.
That's right. Who was it? Someone said, I judge a man. I love this quote, and this really helped me. This really helped me growing up, because moving around a lot, I've always been very, I want to make friends. I don't have a lot of time to make friends. And so I've always been very concerned with wanting to be approachable and to be, vulnerable and to build relationship. I don't remember if it was Winston Churchill. I think it was Winston Churchill that says, I judge a man by the quality of his enemies. Like a man who has, or something to the effect of, like, if you haven't offended anyone, you haven't actually said anything of value. Like,
but if you've offended the right people.
Right. And so the point is right. So the point is like, if you're saying something true, there will be people who disagree with you, and that's okay. It's
and
okay.
we're still called to speak truth in love. Like
that's right.
That's literally back to the foundation we find ourselves is we're not speaking truth like a bunch of a-holes. We're speaking truth in love. That doesn't mean watered down truth. It just means truth in love. And I actually think that's one of my favorite things about this podcast is it is literally a testament to truth and love.
Yeah. I think that gets abused a little bit by people who want to trend a little 100%. Too much in the nice direction, because the parameters of what truth and love looks like, it does obviously encompass everything that Jesus ever said to anybody. It was always true, and it was always in God's love. And he said some pretty not nice things to some pretty overtly evil people in the Pharisees and whatnot. Don't
to the divine dad lore.
I would say that the level of what does truth and love look like? Truth and love looks like by saying something that might offend somebody, but opens the door for them to engage with you in it.
Yeah, love is self-sacrificial.
I think that's way too nice.
Here you go. Here's a better Tim. Think of it this way.
What's the point of truth if you can't engage with it, man? If you're shutting off engagement of truth, it's not really it's not done in good faith.
Clearly, when Jesus, using the Jesus versus the Pharisees, right? This is an intent ideological disagreement, and they oppose him. They want to kill him. Okay. The idea that I'm gonna open the door for you. Now, obviously, that door was open if they had a sudden change of heart, but he is not going to sit there and pretend like they're negotiating in good faith and actually asking genuine questions. They're asking traps, right? And then he snaps their traps shut in their own face, right? So
publicly,
that's within publicly, right? So I don't. The idea that it has to be nice, you have to be seen to.
Yeah, it did. Josh, it did.
No. It doesn't shut. It doesn't shut. What shuts down the
God
dialogue
was willing.
over what truth is. It doesn't shut down the dialogue of him reaching out to Israel, saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've longed to gather you as a hen."
But that specific conversation.
No, Josh,
like
what
I'm
he's saying,
like multiple things. Okay, maybe I misunderstood you.
Break. Let me mediate here. All right, Jesus shut down. Here's what people do today, right? If I don't, this is actually kind of funny because it reminds me of China, right? Saving face is like the ultimate thing. I would never call you out publicly in China, right? I will always give you a way to bow out gracefully, right? So I would never show
it's an honor,
or highlight.
Culture.
Correct. I would never highlight or show, which, by the way, the Near East was the same way during Jesus' time. So it's really important for us to understand this. When Jesus acknowledged or shut down or highlighted the fact that this was basically a trap, that was offensive to them. So the idea here is that, to your point, Josh, which is what I'm saying, what I hear you saying, is that of course Jesus was never not willing to engage, right? He would have, if they had turned around and said,
not willing to be offensive. He was willing to be offensive. Yes.
And willing to engage. But here's what's happened in Western culture, which is what I think Tim is pointing out.
Okay.
Is that in our current culture, most churches and many pastors, many Christian public speakers are unwilling to snap the trap in the face of the person who said it in order to preserve the relationship. I don't want to come across as mean. That would be mean for me to snap the trap in your face and highlight to everyone how you had said that. Is that accurate, Tim?
I agree.
So
it's not being nice. You can if someone comes to you in bad faith and they are,
and
it's
you
like
call
when people
them.
come and say, when someone comes and says, "Oh, well, would you allow abortion in the case of rape or incest?" Is that really what we're talking about?
Is that really
Do
what
I have to treat that seriously? No, because that's not a good faith argument.
But I'm saying, so I guess maybe the point, let me clarify what I'm saying about being approachable or allowing the conversation to happen. I'm not talking about, hey, let's discuss the point that I just caught you in a trap and I'm shutting down your lies with the truth. End of discussion, period. That's it. The Pharisees had a choice to either come back and engage and talk to him about the things that matter, or they could walk away, and they didn't. Right? When in Luke 15, when he's talking about the parable of the prodigal son, it was the Pharisees and the scribes that were scoffing at what he was saying about being with sinners and all that stuff, and he tells them two previous parables that they would obviously agree with. You would take a sheep and save your one sheep for the 99. You would obviously look for your week's worth of wages of the woman in the coin. coin. And then he elaborates on the story of the prodigal son. And he talks about how the son came back to the father, and the father went and ran towards him and clothed him, put it as the ring of royalty, who had a fatted calf slain, and the older brother was bitter, saying, I've been with you all this time. And what he was saying to the Pharisees is like, okay, I get it. You're the older brother. How are you going to respond? Are you going to respond like the father, or are you going to respond like the older brother? Right. And they didn't like, and it doesn't say how they responded. So in that sense,
Well,
they
wanted to kill him.
the truth. Well, in a different case, they wanted to kill him, but like in Luke 15, it just kind of moves on. Right. It didn't show how they responded to him, but it was offensive. It was on the nose. And it opened up the opportunity to have the conversation in those guidelines. That's all I'm saying. That's what
we're always seeking. But this is the thing. Yeah, that's our lie. Yeah, again, and I get that. I think it's just interesting to me. I think, Josh, what you've pointed out, which is it's the heart. Like what I'm getting at is there's tension here, and I want people who maybe if you're listening to this and you're not a Christian, I need you guys got to understand this. If you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, like Christians are torn. We're torn because we love you. We believe that you are in danger. Facts. Like that's literally what we believe, that you are in danger of the eternal variety. Okay. And at the same time, why we want to build trust and help you understand that we love you and we care about you. But at the same time, we don't want to be enabling or acting as if this is not serious. I mean, in the Bible, it talks about, like Christians are supposed to be salt and light. The gospel is a stumbling block. If you come in contact with it and it doesn't seem to be of any consequence, can it really be that serious? Can it really be that important? And so while if you're not a Christian and you're listening to this and you're like, dude, this is a lot of craziness about this, just understand like Christians have a really hard time with this. And that is the primary audience of this podcast. I'm speaking to them and to us and to saying like, listen, we are in a phase in our society and our culture as Americans where the time of like sitting back and not speaking up, the time of like the salt has lost its saltiness is kind of what we're getting at. The stumbling block has been eroded generation. To a pebble. Yeah. Like the time for the stumbling block to become a little bit more pronounced, to stub more toes is at hand. The time for salt to become salty wait to see if it'll now.
The time to wait to see if it'll blow over has passed.
Yeah, we're not.
We are behind. We need to be aggressive, speaking the truth in love, but we do need to be aggressive and willing to offend. Lovingly.
So it's interesting. It's interesting you guys say that because it's like, Hughes, I agree with you, but then I also see signs of hope. Yeah, so it's like there is some really cool hope where it's like the Roe v. Wade thing does help me believe that we may not be as much of a post-Christian nation as I thought we were. And some of the different signs at the times. Now, let me be frank, it is still crazy out there, and we are in two close to war fronts, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on right now. But like, I don't know, it does give me hope. It does, I will agree. Say over since 2020, right, since the infamous COVID world, I will say it is easier to get and find despair. And I have found myself having to pull away from a lot of these cultural voices because it's just like, and I'm the most optimistic, positive dude you will ever meet.
He is,
and it's bringing me down. And I'm like, whoa, that's a sign. And so I don't know, like equally, I'm excited that we can equally offer some refreshment and further be like, like there's more of us than I think we realize. Yeah. Roe v. Wade, different things like that. I don't know. That's all I got.
And don't give in to people who are telling you what you're morally obligated to spend your vote on based on their specific set of priorities. Maybe you just have different estimations of what the culture is ready for. And they think that, well, if we just banned it, everybody would get over. I don't think that's where we are. That's why I evaluate that calculus differently.
Yeah.
But don't be browbeaten by people. Understand that you have the right and you have the resources to make those judgments. And it's okay to do that.
All right. I'm going to close this out here. Here's the thing. Listen, abortion is murder. We know that. All right. But here's the best part to Nick's point. we're debating a federal or a state ban. Like, what?
Hallelujah.
I didn't expect that.
Which we can do.
Right?
What?
Because let me
Where
tell you
were
what's
we?
not going to happen.
Where were we there?
Roe v. Wade's not coming back. All right, like
No.
we know that.
At
all
least
right?
not on the,
So-
the legal grounds
right.
that it was
It's not happening.
originally put.
It's not happening. I'm believing for it. I'm praying for it. So,
Yeah.
like here's the thing: keep your heart on Jesus, keep your eyes on the kingdom. That's what the Bible says. And like and subscribe. Have a great day.
Leave a comment. Let us know what you think.